Ooh, 1, 2, 3, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, this is just a very, very quick live to let you know that I'm going live tomorrow. What a live for a live, yes, but I announced earlier that we were going live in London at the wrong time. The reason for this is because I was in Ibiza and then I went to do some work with Pierre in Prague, which is a different time zone, and then across to the UK, which is a different time zone, and then back to, and it just scrambled my brain. London and Los Angeles are always 8 hours apart, so they've always, nothing's moved. I moved, the geography didn't change, but I got confused. So tomorrow we're doing 12 p.m. in LA, which is 8 p.m. in London, not 9, as I said, it's 8 p.m. in Londinium town, and 9 p.m. in the European places. In the if you're Madrid or east of Madrid, it'll be 9 p.m. So that's just to let you know. This is just a quick one. But because I'm on, I'm going to answer a couple of questions. There's people coming on now. Hit me with a question, make it one sentence long, end it in the squiggly sigil, as this is noon, for a question mark, and I will answer it for you now. Boom. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about alchemy, which is something I touched on the other day. I ran a poll today on the Spartan Life Coach community channel tab. So if you go to the Spartan Life Coach channel on YouTube, there's a community tab, and I ran a poll and got some really, really interesting results about what people want to see on the channel, which is cool. Really, really cool. Morgan asks, question, what's the answer? I don't know, Morgan. I'm going to take the piss out for accent for being a Brummie. That's allowed. It's allowed. Brummies do it to Scousers, so I get to do it back. I have no idea. Where did you get your t-shirt from? I don't remember. I've been watching you for 2 years because... Okie dokie. Can narcissists change? Is it usual for a counter-dependent to relate to a narcissist? When the word narcissist is bandied about on the online spaces, people like me, pedants and academic types, get a bit snotty about it and start asking questions like, well, what is it that you mean? When you say the word narcissist, do you mean full-blown narcissistic personality disorder? Because if that is what you mean, that the person would get a clinical diagnosis from somebody who's qualified to diagnose them of NPD, then strictly speaking, one of the things that makes NPD is the fact that it's very, very unlikely to change. Narcissistic personality disorder is a response to childhood trauma. It's a complex post-traumatic stress response that is primarily fight and secondarily fawn, but it's locked in. It's very, very rigidly locked in. So if the person is full-blown NPD, it is extremely unlikely that they're going to change. If you're asking me for hope, as many people have over the last 7 years, know that I am the crusher of all hope. And so that question usually is replied with no. If you're asking me, is there hope for me with my boyfriend who I think has NPD, my answer would be, you're probably better off giving up hope if it is actually NPD, which none of us are qualified to diagnose. So another good question you can ask is this relationship fun? Am I having a good time? Is this what love looks like? Or is this jolly hard work for all concerned? And if it's not fun, and it's not what love looks like to you, and it's not in line with your values and congruent with your ideas of love and intimacy and vulnerability, and if it even seems to be tinged with elements of malignancy and abuse and usingness, then you are free to give up hope and leave even without a diagnosis of NPD. Somebody asked a question about counter-dependence. Many people asked when I released the remix of the counter-dependency video today, if this relates to narcissism. Yes, it does, but a counter-dependent is not necessarily going to have NPD. Somebody could just have counter-dependent traits or a counter-dependent style, and that in and of itself could be overcome. But yes, why you're asking the question is where we'll see the overlap is somebody with NPD will usually reject genuine intimacy and vulnerability because it's extremely threatening for them. As we move forward in rampant consumerism, rampant unfettered materialism, rampant unfettered individualism, as I said to somebody else, I think it was in the comments today, Graham Goins or Loins, what we're seeing is everybody's going, hey, there seems to be this spiraling thing of NPD. There are NPDs everywhere. There's narcissists here, there, and everywhere. And I suspect that what's actually happening is we're seeing the symptoms of a cause. Why would times now be more narcissistic? Well, probably, strictly speaking, they're not really more NPD than before. But if you have rampant, unfettered individualism, consumerism, and materialism, people are going to get very, very sick very quickly. So what applies to the person applies to the group, applies to this vague nebulous term that we use called a society or a culture. So if people are lost in consumerism, materialism, and individualism, those are the things that will make them sick. And the coordinates of individualism, materialism, and consumerism are that you become very entitled. You drop in your resilience. Your impulse control starts to lower. You start to see people as things. That's not even your fault. Like society, culture, whatever we want to call it, PR, the marketing system, is training you and conditioning you to see other human beings as competitors, as threats, and as things. And so we interact from what would be observed as a more narcissistic modality, but it's not the cause, it's just a series of symptoms. What do you do when you have been successfully annihilated covertly by both your ex and your brother over a long time to restore the truth and get back into my life? You went from what do you do, meaning me, and then you finished it with your life. I was going to say this sounds like an oddly specific question, from which I feel locked out. So what do I do in your life? I have no idea, my friend. The ins and outs and the nuances and the specifics and the serial numbers and the color socks you have on today, I'm not familiar with. What I can answer here in this format is probably more general questions that would be of use to the larger number of people, rather than you starting with a question that begins with you and ends in I don't know enough about your situation. It sounded very, very specific. It's probably best if I could stick to generalities and principles. But, if you find yourself in a situation where you've been on the receiving end of some particularly nasty sliming, which I think is a Chris Godinez phrase, that when somebody slimes you, so like experience of talking with a cluster B disordered person, as you walk away you feel slimed, like the Slimer in the old Ghostbusters, the good Ghostbusters. That if you feel like you've been slimed, then you do need to take time out to recover from that before you can make any major life decisions, because it emotionally dysregulates you, it wears away your boundaries, and that alters your perceptions. I need to ask, how do you tell the narc to go away with an edge? You just pick up a blade and go away. No, I have no idea how you tell somebody to go away with an edge. What are these specific differences between CPTSD and BPD? You're just really softballing me tonight, guys. I was hoping for some hard questions. Wowie. The CPTSD, BPD question, I've covered it a lot on this channel, and I saw that Dr. Todd Grande has a video on BPD and CPTSD. I've not watched that one, but I've watched other of his videos, and they're very thorough. So why don't you go check out Dr. Todd Grande, BPD versus CPTSD. I doubt there will be many mistakes in it. So go ahead and do that, and I'm sure it'll give you everything that you're looking for there. I'm stuck in grieving, says CT. How do you end? Grieving, interesting, a very, very interesting question. This all ties in with the notion of looking to overcome the emotional flashbacks that many of us find ourselves living inside of, and in developing our emotional literacy. Grieving will pass more quickly the more it is skillfully and compassionately handled. That's compassion for others and compassion for yourself. Grieving really pushes you into a state of sobriety. I've just been through a grieving process. I'm in a grieving process myself, and I find one of the things with it is it really knocks the playfulness out of me. I don't have that playful puppy-like, let's tell jokes and funny stories in funny voices energy when I'm in because grieving is a process, it's a cycle, and sometimes it comes, it goes, it flows, it's like an ebb and tide. I'm not in the mood for it at that point. So I change, but I'm noticing that through the grief, it forces me to mature. It's the interesting thing about sadness and grieving is if you're looking to transcend and to grow, if we've identified that elements of CPTSD traits from childhood trauma are that we remain emotionally infantile, and that emotionally infantile state isn't very good for us. One of the things that seems to help us to transcend that is grieving, is authentically processing the emotion, experiencing loss, and facing the truth of life and death in its fullness, which was one of the nice messages in Pete Walker's book, The Tao of Fully Feeling. The Tao, Tao of Fully Feeling, a book I highly recommend if you want to know more about grieving. Have you had any experience with Reiki or Yun method of Chinese energetics? Very little experience with Reiki, but what I have seen time and again in my martial arts training, because I did various healing modalities through the martial arts, through Russian martial arts, Chinese martial arts, Japanese, and in Malaysian martial arts, is where two human beings set an intent to heal and then go through a ritual that harnesses energies to cause healing. The subjective experience of the person seeking to be healed very often is, I was healed by that, which to me sounds like a process that works. I mean, I was forced to study psychology as a science, behavioral psychology, which wasn't much fun, and I was forced to do statistics. I didn't do very well at it, but I did pass. And I believe that statisticians would tell us that if that was an experiment and more people said, hey, I feel happier now, and hey, I've healed now, then they would regard that as, they would say something stuffy like, it needs further research, but it seems to be basically quite positive. So it seems to be good, man. I mean, and it's worked every time I tried it. One time at band camp, one time I was in a sports hall in London, and I was doing Systema back in the Dizzy. I was probably about 23 or 24 with Michael Rabko and Vladimir Vasiliev, who founded Systema. And they taught people how to do healing. Taught people who'd never done it before. Like their version, it was like the Russian martial art version of body work, healing. And they were like, just try it, just see what happens. Like you lie down, let your mate do it, and then he lies down, and then you do it. And some guy, I don't know, who's like a plumber who really liked boxing, and he was trying Systema for the first time, and he did a process with me, and I really felt better. I got an instant relief from the pain I was feeling, and my training improved that day. So who knows, man? The power of intent. Who knows, man? Who knows? Ibrahim says, could you talk about bullying? I should have brought my glasses. Whilst growing up, and the effect as I constantly see the world as a threatening place. Without choice, I'm 22 and your channel has really put me on a healing journey. You must learn to fight, brother Ibrahim. This is the spiritual battle that we're in. You really do need to, at some point when you've experienced bullying for a period of time, one of the things that it can do is it can make you snuff out the natural flame that is inside of us all, that fire that would allow us to fight and to protect ourselves, because we hate the bullies. So you would never want to do what they've done, and you'd never want to manifest the energy that they've manifested, so you snuff it out in yourself. And that's not a good thing to do. We need to reconnect back with that flame. And that's where your passion comes from. That's where your sense of humor comes from. That's where your capacity to make rapid and decisive decisions and go for it comes from. Without that, you can find yourself feeling quite anxious and depressed. So there will be a need to reconnect with that warrior spirit. And one way of doing that can help, so that you don't go into from a freezing response into a fight response, which would just make you a rageaholic, which is not good, is to transcend all of that and actually embrace a little bit of your own power. Knowing, intellectually at least, that you have the capacity to handle yourself can really, really help with some of these feelings. You're a young man. You have plenty of time, and there's no reason, at age 22, you can start training and you can excel in whichever martial art takes your fancy. There's still plenty of time for that. Do you think mental illnesses or cluster B personality disorders play a role in human evolution? Yeah, that's a tough one, dude. I mean, I would have to go into biology and philosophy and then try and bluff my way through evolutionary theory, hypothesis. Actually, it's a hypothesis, and that would be hard to listen to, and I'm supposed to keep this short. People have put that idea forward. There's a book, I haven't read it, but it's got a good title and a good concept. It's one of those books that I'm like, hey, sounds good, and then I never read it. It's called The Warrior Gene, and the thesis is that people who are more psychopathic would have been the warriors in society. Like the good lefty liberal McLiberalson I am, I don't like genetic explanations for personality traits and character styles, though I accept them. I'm just letting you know I lean away from them. I'm telling you that first. I lean away from genetic descriptions of personality disorders because they freak me out. You know, I'm white and I'm from the north of England, so therefore I'm supposed to enjoy fighting, snorting cocaine, stealing other people's things, their trainers, and making various ladies pregnant, and then not paying child support. And that's where, stereotypes come from. So I don't like it. But I would say that it makes sense to me that there would be a tendency for all people to be able to switch off their emotions under times of stress that would be useful in an evolutionary sense. And I suspect that all of us, when faced with real heavy trauma, like if suddenly a war broke out, genocide, you were looking at the corpses of people you knew from the bank and the supermarket and your neighbors right outside, you probably would fall into what a civilized society calls psychopathy, or there is temporary psychopathy is a thing that exists, and there's also a concept in the literature called context-specific narcissism. So you develop full-blown narcissism. The hypothesis goes it's not accepted by everybody, but only in that context. This would be, in any other terms, a coping strategy. Where do the true warrior psychopaths come in? I don't know, maybe just some people are better at it than others, but I think we all have it within us. I think we all have that within us. I think when we watch a TV show like The Walking Dead, which is, God, it's crap now. The writing is so bad. I just tried to watch an episode now and I had to switch off after 10 minutes. But it was a good idea when it came out. What you can see being explored is how would people respond post-apocalypse? And you would need to engage with violence. That's the world you would live in, regardless of how first world and wealthy your country was before the collapse. You would have to engage with violence, and that would require a degree of psychopathy. Military training deliberately trains people to be what a civilized society would call insane and psychopathic, but it's only expedient. So this is where I don't really want to get too deep into it, because then you have to go, well, what's sanity? Where do we draw the line between sanity and insanity? What's useful? What's not useful? And all of that stuff. So you got to remember, narcissism and psychopathy are only terms that are used for a cluster of behaviors, and they are there and they are strong, and the people who build the world tend to be those in the fight fawn spectrum. They're the action takers, they are the most traumatized, they go the furthest. So it's kind of a wall built by narcissists and psychopaths, which would present a pretty good case for it being an evolutionary adaptation. Whether it's maladaptive or just adaptive, I would leave for the philosophers to debate. What are your thoughts on Carl Jung's work, perhaps in particular the collective unconscious? I think that Carl Jung may be the most overrated person in the history of psychology, but I don't think he is useless. I don't think he's useless. I just am staggered that people stick him on a pedestal whilst poo-pooing Freud and totally ignoring Adler. It seems odd to me. It's a really strange thing. I like the animus-anima concept. I like his approach. I like his style, depending on which phase of his life we're talking about. But he's sentimental and self-indulgent and puts mysticism where more scientific rigor would be appropriate, in my humble opinion. The idea of the collective unconscious is an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about, where it gets a little bit self-indulgent, because I think that he presented an idea knowing that people would think that the collective unconscious meant a literal pool of consciousness in which we're all connected. And when you try to penetrate what he actually wrote about the collective unconscious, that's not really what he meant. And then you go, well, it's for people to read it properly. It's not his fault that people can't be bothered reading it. And I go, well, yeah. In the same way that, like, Freud made his own bed. I don't defend Freud. I will never defend him, because he made his own bed. Like, he said stuff publicly, I think, to get a shock. I think they're the shock jocks of their day. I really do. I really think that, like, Freud published stuff that he didn't even believe in, but he was a working man. You know, he was a public figure. If there was YouTube, he'd have had a YouTube channel, but there wasn't, so he had to write books. So some of the books he wrote and some of the concepts he came out with, I think, were deliberately inflammatory, which wasn't helpful, and makes, there's a backlash to that. Do I think outside of Jung, beyond Jung, that there is something called, that there is an actual collective unconscious where we all meet? Oh, dude, my ideas on that are out there. I think if you penetrate that, and you want to know what I personally think, not what I would tell people in a coaching context, but what I personally think is, yeah, sure. That's Vedic. That's not a Jungian concept. That's a Vedic concept. And it was there in certain strands of Odinism as well. The idea that we all came from one place, one pool, and that we'll all return to one place, one pool. The town that I'm from, or next to, I'm from Birkenhead, but the town next to me is called Liverpool. And famously, we have this bust of Carl Jung that says that Carl Jung once had a dream of Liverpool, but he'd never been there. And he woke up and he said, I've dreamt of Liverpool, and it is the pool of life. Now that pool of life concept, yeah, there's a vague, maybe kind of like, if we're maybe going to have a couple of pints, or, take something a bit funny and have a weird conversation. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Okay, this is my last question, and then I'm going to bounce. What to do? I'm from Liverpool, says Penny. There you go. You are from the pool of life because Carl Jung said so, kid. I can't even remember where that bust is. I think it's down on Matthew Street, the Carl Jung bust. Okay. Grace by Faith asks, are you familiar with the Tavistock Institute? Yes. I've passed it several times, I think, down in London. Mass manipulation and trauma-based mind control through crisis creation. Yes, I am familiar with these tactics, and yes, I do think that they are being used and have been used for a long time. The final question, Janet asks, Richard, what do you think about the concept of trauma from relationships needing to be healed by a healthy relationship? I don't think that you should use your next relationship as a plaster or a tampon for the wounds of the last one. No, that sounds like a terrible idea to me. However, That's my philosophical perspective. However, out there in the real world, that's what most people do because it works. It's like, why do people keep taking drugs? Because it works. The day that cocaine stops making people feel all giddy and heroin doesn't make people feel all blissed out, they're not going to listen to it anymore. Somebody wrote a tampon for the wounds. Yeah, you don't know about that? Battlefield surgery in an emergency. You take a bullet wound. It's one of the most, apparently, I've never done it. But I think that's where masking tape comes from. Oh no, it's not masking tape. Super glue. Super glue is for battlefield surgery. It's to glue things up quickly. Apparently you can use tampons. I read it on the internet, so it must be true. So yeah, okay. No, I don't think that you should get into a relationship to heal the old relationship, but many people do, and they do that because, like taking drugs, it works. You will feel better, you won't be lonely, you'll get validation, you'll sort your oxytocin levels out, your endorphin levels and your serotonin levels out, and who knows, maybe it won't suck this time because you didn't deal with your issues that you should have done from the last relationship. But it wasn't my fault, it was all the other person's fault. Sure it was. Sure it was. Okie dokie, 26 minutes. Time for me to go to bed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and your attention. I'll be on tomorrow talking about alchemy and the transmutation of trauma to higher consciousness. Thank you very much. Cheerio. I'm not going to start saying cheerio at the end of lives. I'm not.